Hi, my name is Pat, and this is my channel, Book Chat with Pat, and I'm glad that you're here. Today is Thursday, April 11th, and I'm going to be presenting another episode of Poetry Thursday, focusing today on the late great American poet Mary Oliver. She is a beloved American icon who has made poetry accessible to many. I'd like to talk a bit about her life and share some of her many books and a few of her best loved poems. Mary Oliver was born in 1935 in a suburb of Cleveland, Ohio. Later in her life, she talked about the fact that she came from a very troubled family and that she experienced horrific abuse as a child at the hands of her father, and she was not protected by her mother. This is what caused her to retreat into nature, taking long walks in a nearby woods, where she discovered her love of nature and her ability to write. She said in an interview with Krista Tippett in her show On Being on NPR that she knows that this retreat into the natural world actually saved her life. Mary Oliver attended both Ohio University and Vassar College, but she did not attain a degree from either school. At some point early in her life, she made her way to the New York State home of the late poet Edna St. Vincent Millay, whose work had had a profound effect on her. She ended up living there for a while, helping Edna St. Vincent Millay's sister organize the papers of the late poet. Oliver also cited the poetry of Walt Whitman and Ralph Waldo Emerson and the British Romantic poets William Wordsworth, Percy Bysshe Shelley, and John Keats as major influences on her own writing. Mary Oliver met Molly Malone Cook, a photographer, in the 1950s, and they lived as life partners, primarily in Provincetown, Massachusetts, until Cook's death in 2005. Oliver didn't really write much about Cook, except to dedicate many of her poetry collections to her, until her relatively late collection, Thirst, which is primarily about the loss of Molly Malone Cook, coping with grief and finding a way to go on. Oliver's poetry is firmly rooted in the natural world in the tradition of the Romantic poets of the 19th century. Nature is both the subject of and the inspiration for much of her poetry. She often writes about the ways in which the human world intersects with the natural world, and also about the limits of language to articulate the meaning of that intersection. Oliver's first book of poetry, No Voyage and Other Poems, was first published in 1963. Her work received early critical acclaim. Her fourth collection, American Primitive, published in 1983, earned Mary Oliver a Pulitzer Prize in Poetry in 1984. Her eighth book, New and Selected Poems, Volume 1, published in 1992, was awarded the National Book Award in Poetry. She also earned fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation and the National Endowment of the Arts. She taught creative writing at Bennington College, where she held the Catherine Osgood Foster Chair for Distinguished Teaching from 1996 through 2001. She died on January 17th, 2019 at the age of 83. Although Oliver has long been and remains one of America's most beloved poets, she was not without her critics and detractors in academia who claimed that her work was simplistic and overly sentimental, too much so to warrant all of the accolades that she had been given. I much prefer Georgetown University's Maureen Corrigan's assessment of Oliver. She did a review on NPR of a late collection of autobiographical essays in 2016 called Upstream. Corrigan reviewed this on the Fresh Air show, and she asserts that Oliver's writing is neither sentimental nor confessional, but rather that it springs from a lifetime paying attention and closely, quote, closely reading nature as well as the work of other great writers, close quote. Similarly, Ruth Franklin wrote in The New Yorker in 2017 when Oliver's final book of poetry, Devotions, came out. Let me show you that. This is a collection of poems from all of her earlier works, and this was they were curated by Mary Oliver herself, and this was published 2 years before her death. So in her review of this collection, Ruth Franklin wrote in The New Yorker, quote, "Part of the key to Oliver's appeal is her accessibility. She writes blank verse in a conversational style with no typographical gimmicks. But an equal part is that she offers her readers a spiritual release that they might not have realized they were looking for. Oliver is an ecstatic poet in the vein of her idols, who include Shelley, Keats, and Whitman. She tends to use nature as a springboard to the sacred, which is the beating heart of her work." Close quote. Indeed, Mary Oliver herself, in her prose guide to writing poetry, called A Poetry Handbook, states that her belief that good poetry can only come from being well versed in the rich poetic traditions that have gone before. She writes, quote, "Many of my students would spend almost all of their time writing and very little of it reading the poems of other poets. But to write well it is entirely necessary to read widely and deeply. Good poems are the best teachers. Perhaps they are the only teachers." She gives her ultimate instructions for living and writing in her poem Sometimes, published in a collection called Red Bird in 2008. She writes, "Pay attention, be astonished, tell about it." So let's get to the poems. The first poem I would like to read, In Blackwater Woods, was first published in her Pulitzer Prize winning volume, American Primitive. In this poem, she describes her profound sense of connection to a forest fire that she witnessed. The poem reflects her deeply felt sense that to be able to love, one must also be prepared to lose and to let go. This is in Blackwater Woods from American Primitive. Look, the trees are turning their own bodies into pillars of light, are giving off the rich fragrance of cinnamon and fulfillment. The long tapers of cattails are bursting and floating away over the blue shoulders of the ponds, and every pond, no matter what its name is nameless now. Every year, everything I have ever learned in my lifetime leads back to this, the fires and the black river of loss, whose other side is salvation, whose meaning none of us will ever know. To live in this world, you must be able to do three things: to love what is mortal, to hold it against your bones, knowing your own life depends on it, and when the time comes, to let it go, to let it go. The next poem that I would like to read is one of her most famous. This is Wild Geese. Wild Geese was first published in her collection Dreamworks in 1986, and it's reprinted here in Devotions, her final book. This is a classic poem in which Oliver asks us to acknowledge our links to the natural world. She acknowledges that we, as humans, have the ability to feel love, despair, loneliness, but we can also find our place, quote, in the family of things, in our own intimate connection to the natural world. Wild Geese. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things. And finally, I would like to read The Summer Day from the 1990 collection, House of Light. Here, Oliver takes us in for a close-up of a particular moment in which a human being has an encounter with a creature in nature. This is a poem about paying attention and about being open to astonishment. Ultimately, I think it's a kind of prayer. The Summer Day. Who made the world? Who made the swan and the black bear? Who made the grasshopper? This grasshopper, I mean, the one who has flung herself out of the grass, the one who is eating sugar out of my hand, who is moving her jaws back and forth instead of up and down, who is gazing around with her enormous and complicated eyes. Now she lifts her pale forearms and thoroughly washes her face. Now she snaps her wings open and floats away. I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel down in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I have been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? And doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? There are many, many more Mary Oliver poems that I would like to share, and I am going to do so in my continuing series of daily shorts for the month of April for National Poetry Month, which I read just a short poem each day. I've already read a few Oliver poems in those shorts, and I have a few more that I will include before the month is over. So that's a bit about Mary Oliver. As always, I thank you for watching. I hope that you're doing well. I'll speak with you again soon. Take care.